Welcome back to VMware View 5 Essentials Training. This lesson will be all about the deployment of ThinApp packages. In this lesson, you'll learn about the different modes of execution that ThinApp provides. We'll talk about how to register the packages so they look like locally installed applications. Then we'll talk about some of the different options you have for deploying your ThinApp packages. We'll also talk quickly about how to secure your packages so only authorized users have access to them. Finally, I'll demonstrate two of the ways that you can deploy your ThinApp packages. There are two different execution modes that ThinApp provides. The first is the deployed execution model, in which the ThinApp package is actually copied to the desktop and then registered. In this mode, it's executed locally off the desktop and can travel with the desktop. This is usually done using the MSI package that we can create when building our ThinApp project. All the steps needed to get a deployed execution model working are included in this MSI package. By using the MSI package, you can use many different software deployment tools, like Microsoft's System Center Configuration Manager, and many others that are designed for deploying software packages. The MSI package is a common way to deploy software to an end-user device. Since ThinApp utilizes MSI packaging, these software packages will view the ThinApp MSI as just a normal software installation. Since it actually exists inside of the desktop, the deployed execution model is the best choice when using local mode virtual desktops or laptops or other portable devices. The other execution mode you can choose from is the streamed execution model. In this case, the end user executes the package across the network, and there is no local copy on the user's desktop. When you look at the Windows shortcuts, you'll see that they actually refer to the UNC path of the network location. The package is streamed directly into RAM of the desktop, so there's no actual caching to the disk. Depending on where you keep your sandbox, it is possible that the pieces contained within the sandbox will reside locally. The streamed execution model definitely provides for better updatability. When using the deployed execution model, you have the option of using AppSync to keep those packages up to date. With the streamed execution model, you can simply replace the package out on the network, and every user will get the latest version the next time they execute the package. Using a typical hosted view desktop, or for desktops that exist on your LAN, streamed execution mode is definitely the better choice. Whichever execution mode you choose, you'll want to register the package. This makes the ThinApp application look as if it were locally installed. It creates local file extension and protocol associations. These are the registry entries that Windows needs to be able to find what application should launch a .doc document, or which web browser should open up an HTTP document. You can configure these in the package.ini file, using the file types and the protocols parameters. The registration process will also create the shortcuts that you define within the package.ini. This is contained in the shortcuts parameter, and generally will exist on the desktop and the start menu, but can also be placed in any file directory that uses a Windows variable name. We'll also add an entry into the Add Remove Programs control panel. This name will be based on the inventory name parameter, and we'll also use the string VMware ThinApp to identify it as a ThinApp package that's been registered. In order to register a ThinApp package, you use the thinreg.exe utility, which is installed onto your ThinApp packaging machine in the Programs directory for ThinApp. The functionality of thinreg is built into the MSI package. So like I said before, all the functionality necessary for the ThinApp package to be used in the deployed model is included inside the MSI package. This includes the registration process with thinreg. So let's talk about the thinreg utility in a little bit more depth. Usually the thinreg utility will be run from a script. This can be a login script or from a multitude of other types of scripts. To use it, you simply need to call the thinreg.exe and give it the full path or relative path of the package that you want to register. As a best practice, I usually copy the thinreg utility from my packaging machine to the file server where I keep all my ThinApp packages. This creates a central place for all the pieces of ThinApp that you need in order to service the end users directly. And when you add these thinreg commands into the script, you need to make sure to add one line for each entry point. Otherwise it won't be registered. The big advantage here is that when registering a package like Microsoft Office that has multiple entry points, you can easily register certain entry points for certain users, and not necessarily have to give users access to all entry points when all they need is one or two. As I said before, it is built into the MSI package, and is automatically run whenever the MSI package is executed. So here's a few useful parameters. The /A or /all users will register the package for all users. This is particularly useful when using the ThinDirect functionality for a web browser. The /Q or /quiet parameter will suppress all messages, including errors. This can be useful when running it during a login script. The /U or /unregister or /uninstall will deregister the package from the Windows machine, removing all shortcuts, file and protocol associations, and the entry within the add remove programs. The /R or /reregister parameters will force a registration even if it's already registered. This can sometimes be necessary when using roaming profiles because pieces of the registration may already exist and can mess with the registration process on future logins. The /noARP will prevent the creation of an entry within the add remove program's control panel. Let's cover several options on how you can deploy your ThinApp packages. The first one is to use a software distribution application. These are applications like SCCM, Altiris, or using the group policy software distribution functionality within Active Directory. It utilizes the MSI package to push it out and install it as if it were a normal application installation. When using this deployment method, you'll generally want to use the app data or network share. But since this is a deployed mode of ThinApp execution and may be getting used on laptops and local mode desktops, you may want to choose the app data location. The next option is the USB deployment method. In this case, you want to place the ThinApp package onto a thumb drive and then deliver the thumb drive to the end user. This makes it portable to any Windows computers that have a USB port. When using this option, you want to configure the sandbox to use the same directory as the package. This means that the user will carry not only the application, but also their sandbox along with it. The third option is to use the login script. To do this, you'll utilize the ThinReg utility and register it during the login. I recommend using VBScript so you can apply a more robust layer of logic to the registration process, being able to use all sorts of variables, such as group membership and location information of the end user. In this login script, you want to make sure to run it for each entry point, or if you want to run it for all entry points, you can utilize wildcards. ThinApp will traverse all of the folders the user has access to when using wildcards. So this allows you to use security of the directories and tell it to simply register everything within a network directory. The next option is the shortcut deployment option. In this option, you can use a script, a default user profile, or some other third-party utility that can create or copy shortcuts to the proper locations on the user's desktop and start menu. The downside to this option is the fact that the file and protocol extensions won't be properly configured, nor will the add remove programs, but that's rarely as big a deal. The next option is to use the integrated ThinApp deployment that Vue offers us. This utilizes a ThinApp repository, which really is just a pointer to the network location where we store our ThinApp packages. This integration with Vue is limited to deploying ThinApp packages to the pool or individual desktop. We can't do it based on username or group membership. But since it's not based on the user information, Vue can register the ThinApp packages during the desktop customization phase, rather than during the user's login process, which leads to quicker login time. Vue gives you the option of deploying the package using streamed or the deployed execution mode. But it does require the creation of the MSI package either way. Since Vue will look into this MSI package to determine how it should deploy it, even in streamed mode. The final option we'll discuss is using third-party applications. These are applications created by third parties that include functionality specifically for deploying ThinApp packages. The three biggest players in the space include Liquidware Labs, AppSense, and RES Software, all of which are also top profile management solutions. Finally, let's talk about securing these ThinApp packages. Your first option is to define the permitted groups within the package. This blocks users that are not listed in the AD group from executing the application. ThinApp does this check immediately on launch and will provide an error message and destroy the ThinApp bubble before launching the application. As I mentioned before, you can also use directory permissions. Since ThinReg runs in user mode, the user that runs the script must have access to the package, otherwise the registration will fail. And like I said before, you can register an entire directory of ThinApp packages using the wildcard method. And the directory permissions will prevent the user from gaining access to the ThinApp package. Next, you can use a custom scripting option. These scripts are actually embedded inside of the ThinApp package and are run during execution. It allows you to use variables other than group membership to identify whether the user should be able to launch the application. These scripts can be anything from the time of day to the type of operating system the user is running, or any other thing that you can script out. Most third-party tools that you use to deploy the ThinApp packages will usually be based on user and group membership, so you can deploy the packages to only the end users that are authorized to access them. Now it's time for me to show you the most flexible way of deploying ThinApp packages, using a user login script. I'm going to start here on our ThinApp packaging machine. It's been reverted back to the clean desktop image. Our packages directory out on the network is going to be the central location for users to go for accessing their ThinApp applications. Out here I've already copied the ThinReg utility and created a ThinApp registration batch file. This is where we're going to script out the registration of a ThinApp package. The script doesn't have to be a batch file, but could be a VB script or any other script that's supported for a user login script. We start the registration of each ThinApp application by referencing the ThinReg utility. This is the executable that we want the batch file to run. Next, we need to reference the actual ThinApp package, which in our case is going to be this Opera executable here. And since our path contains spaces, we're going to need to enclose this in quotes. And to do a basic registration of a ThinApp package, that's all you need. This exact same command could be run directly from a command prompt if you wanted to. But in this case, we'll go ahead and save this file and test it. Now we've run into an error here. This error is the unable to register the ThinApp package. This is because the ThinDirect plugin can't be installed on a per-user basis. It must be installed for all users. This is pretty easy to do, but first we need to clean up this failed installation. To unregister an application, we simply need to enter a /u flag. Save the file, and rerun the batch file. And now our Opera registration is gone. To switch it over to all users, we come in here and edit, and we'll change the /u to a /a, indicating an all-user registration. We'll save that and rerun our batch file. Now we've had no errors, and we can see that Opera is on the desktop, in our Start menu shortcuts, and in our All Programs directory. If we come into our Control panel and look in Add Remove Programs, you'll see that Opera 11, a ThinApp version of it specifically, has been installed on this machine. While there's been no physical installation of Opera, ThinReg does put an entry in here for the purposes of tracking what software has been registered on the machine. Let's take a look at the shortcut that Opera placed on the desktop. Looking at the target, we can see it's pointing to our network location. So we know when we double-click this, it's going to execute something off the network. So let's give that a try. First of all, you can see that there's a little screen that pops up, letting us know that Opera is launching. And now we have our Opera browser, which has never been installed on this Windows machine, but yet we have full ability to utilize it. Now that we've run this application once, let's go out to the network location where we defined our sandbox to be and take a look at the structure of the sandbox itself. Out on our ThinApp share on our NAS server, we have a sandboxes directory. In that sandboxes directory, we have one folder so far. That's for the administrator account that I'm currently logged in as. Inside here you can see there's an Opera 11 folder. The name of this folder is defined by the inventory name. In here you can see several files that represent the virtual registry. You can also see the app data and local app data directories that represent the virtual file system. That's the sandbox location that this administrator will always access whenever running this Opera 11 ThinApp package. Now obviously we won't want our users to double-click the ThinApp registration batch file every time that they want their applications. We want their applications to look like they're already installed, which means we need to have these registered during the login process. That's where the login script comes in. So I switched over to the domain controller, where we manage our GPOs. Here you can see, on my user accounts OU, I've created a GPO called ThinApp Deployment, which I'll use to define what applications I want to deploy to my users. You can see in the settings that nothing's been set yet, so let's go in and edit this GPO. Login scripts are a user configuration, so we'll go under User Configuration, under Policies, Windows Settings, and under Scripts. Now we can double-click on Logon. Here's where we can define what scripts will be run during the login process for any users that are inside the scope of this GPO. Here we can click Add and provide the full path to our batch file. Once we have that entered, we can simply click OK. And now that batch file will be run every time a user logs in. Now I've switched over to my client device, where we're going to launch the View client. We'll connect to our ViewCon 01 server and log in as Louisa, who's in the user accounts OU. Louisa is a member of the call center, which you may recall is a linked clone floating pool that's refreshed every time the user logs off. So any changes the user makes will be wiped out unless they're saved on the network. And in the case of this Opera package that we're testing, the changes she makes will be saved in her sandbox, which is being redirected out to the network. So let's connect. And now you'll see that Opera is in our shortcut menu, on our All Programs menu, and also on the desktop. Launching it, you can see it as a ThinApp package. And now we have Opera on a machine that has never had Opera installed on it before. Let's do a quick test of our ThinDirect functionality. Remember that we had defined that trainsignal.com would redirect to the ThinApp package. And like magic, trainsignal.com has loaded in Opera even though we typed it into Internet Explorer. So that's how you can deploy your ThinApp packages, through traditional login scripts. Now let's move on to a more integrated deployment method of ThinApp with the VMware View product itself. We're going to start off here in View Administrator, where we're going to go into the ThinApp configuration section. And the first step we need to do is add a repository. There's two main fields we need to provide for this repository, the display name and the share path. For the display name, we'll call it NAS repository. For the share path, we'll point it directly to our packages directory out on NAS 01. You can also choose to put a description if we care to. We'll go ahead and save this. And now we have a NAS repository. The next step is to come into our inventory in this ThinApp section. Now that we've defined a repository, we can scan for new ThinApps. And select the repository that we just created. You can see by default it selects the packages directory that we defined to be the base of our repository. You could also drill down and select specific subdirectories if we wanted to. Now scan that directory, and it's found 3 different MSI packages that represent ThinApp packages. Let's go ahead and choose all 3 of these, and click the Scan button. Now it's going to go through a process of scanning the MSI packages to determine the details of our different ThinApp packages. It's now completed scanning them and added all 3 into our ThinApps inventory within View. We can see here the ThinApp name, the vendor, how many full assignments and streaming assignments have been made. By selecting one of our ThinApp packages, we now have the ability to come up here and do an Add Assignment, which we can assign to either pools or desktops. Let's go ahead and assign it to a pool. And we'll add it to the call center pool by selecting Call Center and then clicking Add. You can see in the installation type that we have choices of streaming and full. Currently, streaming is disabled. There are 2 things that need to occur that we haven't set up to allow streaming of ThinApp packages. The first is that the NTFS permissions on the network share that hosts the ThinApp packages must be set to read and execute for all the users. Secondly, in our package.ini file, before we do the build of the ThinApp package, we must set the MSI streaming value equal to 1 to enable streaming of the MSI package. For now, a full deployment is good, so we'll click OK. Now you can see full assignments has moved to 1 on the Opera 11 package. Now let's demonstrate the template functionality by creating a new template. A ThinApp template within View is a predefined set of applications that we want to push to a user or group of users. We'll start by giving the template a name. We'll call it Alternate Web Browsers. Now we can add our ThinApps. In this case, we'll add Firefox and Chrome, and then click Add. Now we have 2 ThinApp packages that belong to this template. Clicking OK. Now we can see that we have a template created with 2 different ThinApp packages a part of it. Selecting that template gives us the ability to add assignment, again to either pools or desktops. Again, we're going to use pools and select Call Center, and then click OK. And now from 2 different avenues within View, we've assigned ThinApp packages to the Call Center pool. So let's go log in as a Call Center user. We'll again log in as Louisa, who is a member of our call center. We're now fully logged into the user's desktop. Looking in the programs, we can see that Opera has been installed, Mozilla has been installed, and Google Chrome has also been installed. We can verify that by looking at the Add Remove programs within Control Panel. Where you can see all three are ThinApp packages. So I think it's pretty clear that deploying ThinApp packages with the Vue integration is a lot simpler and a lot quicker than trying to use the user login script. But its biggest limitation is the fact you can only deploy it to a pool or specific desktop, rather than to a user or group, which is generally how you would want to deploy applications. So if you want some more information about how to deploy your ThinApp packages, I recommend looking through the ThinApp User Guide and the ThinApp Deployment Guide, which is going to cover a lot of your possibilities. The Vue 5 Administration Guide is going to give you the details you need to implement the Vue integration with ThinApp. So let's wrap up. We started by talking about the execution modes that ThinApp can use. This includes both deployed execution, where the ThinApp is copied to the local desktop, or streamed execution, where the local desktop accesses the package from across the network. We then talked about why we want to register the package and what that means to our UI within Windows, and a little bit about the usage of the ThinReg utility. We also went over several different options on how you can deploy the ThinApp packages, including using traditional software distribution applications in conjunction with the MSI package, using a USB stick to deploy the ThinApp package for high portability, both in and outside the organization. There's the login script method that I just showed you through the previous demonstrations. There's a shortcut deployment where you simply push out shortcuts to the ThinApp package on the network. Then there's the built-in functionality of VMware Vue to deploy the ThinApp packages. And the final option we talked about was using third-party applications that have built-in intelligence for pushing out ThinApp packages. Then we talked about package security and how you can ensure that only the proper users have access to these ThinApp packages. The different options we talked about, including using a permitted groups list within the package itself, using directory permissions out on the network share, using a custom scripting option within the ThinApp package itself, and also using third-party applications that we mentioned within the deployment options. It also provides security on who gets what applications. And we finished up by doing some deployment walkthroughs for both the login script and the VMware Vue-based integration. So now you should be well equipped to both create ThinApp packages and get them out to your end users.